More than 1,000 people were arrested in Russia during a political protest led by Alexei Navalny, if I got that right, the Russian opposition leader. Navalny, who was arrested himself, has turned out to be a big political leader and plans to run for president in 2018. In other international news, Conservative Party in the UK lost the majority of their seat in the last election. Theresa May was forced to pursue a deal with Democratic Unionist Party of Northern Ireland. And lastly, the Senate questions Trump's weapons deal with Saudi Arabia. Here to discuss those topics, please welcome SUNY Maritime Professor and also a political analyst, Mark Meirowitz. Nice to have you with us,
Hi, Gary.
Professor. You wanted to comment on the last segment.
Yeah, I thought it was a great segment, right? You're talking about sessions with Russia, but it segues into American foreign policy with Russia, which is non-existent.
Let me ask you something.
Please.
Do you have a sense that if there was any collusion, it was to assist Putin and take away some of the sanctions?
Oh, I certainly don't know more than the people who testified in the hearings,
right.
But we see sort of in the law, I'm also a lawyer, and we know that res ipsa, the thing speaks for itself. A lot of these people who are testifying don't recall, don't want to answer. And that's very, very strange. But the point that I think that came out was very important was the question that was asked of Sessions is, have you, in all the time that you've interacted with the president and otherwise, have you ever heard any questions about Russia's hacking of elections and interfering with America? And the answer was no. I never got a briefing on that. And that is very, very strange. We also know that when the president went to NATO, he didn't mention Article 5, which is the collective security concept. We know that there seems to be an absence of commentary on Russia, including these mass protests, which you just mentioned, where the people in Russia are not very happy with Putin, and Putin's mischief around the world is well known. And his expansionism, his foreign policy is very problematic, and the United States is not pushing back against it.
Well, you said that it's very strange that
Yes.
he said he wasn't briefed on it. Strange to the point of making him not believable, or strange to the point of saying, you know what, something is not right in the administration? In other words, characterize what you meant by strange.
Well, I think it's a good question, but it's one as to which there's no clear answer at the present time. I don't think I'm any more knowledgeable, certainly, than the senators who were at that hearing. And I think the answer is the investigation by Robert Mueller, and I think that is the one that is going to hopefully bring out the answers. It is very, again, peculiar and disturbing that the head of national intelligence and these lead people who are supposed to be there to protect us against the threats outside are not answering questions that the American people are entitled to know. The thing about the mass protest, I think, is very important. There is a groundswell in Russia against Putin, but Putin suppresses it. Can you imagine that? You saw that at the protests, you had huge numbers of police suppressing a peaceful protest. We know that there are dictators in the world like this. In North Korea, we have it in Russia. And the problem is, just as a last point, what we seem to be doing in our foreign policy, which is in complete chaos, by the way, what we're doing is we are spending more time with our enemies, right? Like the Philippines are not an enemy, but detractors, and the Russians, right? And we have them, the Russians come to the Oval Office, right? But our friends in the world, the British, the Australians, the others, they don't get any much love from America. And America has been the friend to the world, to Europe, the Marshall Plan. We've been the friend, we've been the savior of Europe. Where is America now?
Just to extend the notion of peaceful protest to America, many of the domestic policies are being changed to make it more difficult to protest. So I don't want to isolate it and say that that's only a foreign question. Anyway,
I mean, I'm not so sure on that point. In other words, if you're talking about civil liberties in this country, I think that what I have seen, and I'm very, as an American, I'm very proud by the level of open debate on these subjects and the freedom of the press. Even though the press has been castigated as the enemy of the people, the press has been out there. The other thing that has impressed me tremendously is the function of the Senate. You know, Washington always revered the Senate. Profiles encouraged by JFK is about the great leaders in the Senate. We see the senators in front, up front, questioning the administration, doing their job, and representing the American people. We're not seeing that. For example, in that cabinet meeting that Trump had, where he basically had everybody go around and tell him how wonderful he was, that is not, we're not seeing that from the executive branch, but we're sure seeing a vibrant Congress, which is very good.
Let's talk about a couple of the other foreign policy things.
Perfect.
It's very interesting in this country, after President Trump was elected, there was a very strong anti-conservative uprising. Whether it was enough to win the election, that's of course another question. But in London and in England, there has been an anti-conservative uprising. How significant is the recent vote?
Well, you have to
England?
go back a little bit in the history of Brexit and see where this all started. And it was really misstep after misstep after misstep.
By Theresa May?
Well, Cameron, too. Cameron said, you know, we have to make this an issue. We have to have a referendum, which just said leave or remain. No options. Referenda can be very tricky. You can only say yes or no. Well, they answered, we want to leave. Well, you can't just leave something as big as the European Union. There's Article 50, there's British laws. I just want to add one more thing. And then Theresa May came along and said, oh, okay, now I'll call an election. And that was a misstep upon misstep, and she is now in a very, very bad position.
What is the significance of that long term in terms of the, kind of the stability of the British government?
Not the British government,
I
but
didn't
Britain's
mean as a
position
whole.
in Europe
Yes.
is in risk, because Britain has tremendous contacts with Europe, trade contacts, political contacts. And the point is, the question is, how do you fashion this pullout from the EU? Do you do it at all? Or do you actually, you can't just pull out Britain from Europe. Europe will lose a tremendous amount of trade that it has in interactions. But you also, from the British point of view, they don't want to stay in the EU and have the right of all EU members to freely traverse British territory, if you see my point. So there are upsides and downsides. What Theresa May has done is she's put Britain between a rock and a hard place, in a very bad position, and without many options.
Last question.
President Trump
cut an arms deal with Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
Right afterwards, they went out and started to rip Qatar, which has been a very important base for America in that part of the world. Are those two items connected?
Right. Well, sure, everything is connected in politics, right, Gary? Okay.
You got to be quick about 15 seconds.
But in 15 seconds, that is the biggest kerfuffle and conundrum in world politics today is Qatar. We have a base in Qatar, right? So President Trump came up with his point, well, Qatar isn't bad and all of that, following the Saudi point. But then someone reminded him that we have a base there. And Rex Tillerson, his own Secretary of State, said, please go slowly here, because we don't want to destroy the whole situation.
We got to go. Do you think those two things are connected, the Saudi arms deal and his criticism of Qatar?
The Saudi arms deal is clearly connected. Saudi relations, the president likes Saudi Arabia.
Listen, we could go on and on. Professor Mark Marowitz from SUNY Maritime, thank you very much. Also a political analyst, we appreciate it.
It's great.
You stay tuned. We'll be right back with Open after these messages.